Tēnā koutou katoa ko Mangoika toku maunga. So my mountain, Mangoika, is the Maori word for North Head, just near Devonport, near where I live. No ko Waitemata toku awa, so not many rivers near us, but Waitemata Harbour is close by. No Belmont Aho, my suburb is Belmont, there in the North Shore. Ko redi toku whanau, ko anan redi toku ingoa, that's my name. No raira tēnā koutou, tēnā ra tatoa katoa. Welcome.
I have too much respect for the Maori to try to denigrate their language. So if you'll excuse me, I'll do this in English. Greetings to everyone. My mountain are the Santa Cruz Mountains that stand between San Francisco Bay and the Pacific Ocean. They're actually on the San Andreas Fault, headed towards Alaska. My river is the San Lorenzo River, which is the river that runs down the western side of the mountains to a city called Santa Cruz, which is known for its surfing. My home is in Portola Valley, which is a small village sort of nestled in the east side of the Santa Cruz Mountains, close to the San Francisco Bay. My boat was a 1972 Plymouth Duster that took me from the East Coast to the West Coast as I moved from Boston to San Francisco. My family name is Commissar. My grandfather brought that with him from Russia in 1908 when he came to the United States. I'm the first generation to go to college in my family. And my given name is Randy. So greetings to you all.
So, as Randy was saying, this is a sort of a repeat performance from last year where I had the privilege of meeting Randy and being up on stage with him as well. And one of the things that sort of struck me was he's obviously a deep thinker and has a lot of great experiences to share with us. One of the things that you may be aware of that's changed, or I guess is new in the last 12 months, is after the experience of the last summit, Randy went away and, as you do, wrote a book. And he's written multiple books. And I guess, Randy, first question, just going back to sort of what was the sort of thinking behind the book? And the book's got 100 rules for startups and sort of recommend people have a look at it. It's sort of phased into different areas of how a company might run. But can you just talk us about the thinking about sort of what caused you to go ahead and write the book?
Yeah, the book is called Straight Talk for Startups, 100 Insider Rules for Beating the Odds. It's very interesting. I think when I was here last year, I alluded to the fact that I was writing a book with a co-author, John Thun Reigersman, a CFO of a public company and once a Kleiner company. And we had been toying with the idea of how to communicate sort of the insider lore and best practices of the Valley. And he had been breaking his pick on this for about 18 months. We'd been working together, but we couldn't tell the story. It was just too hard. There were too many different things to talk about. And after having so many conversations here last year and with entrepreneurs in Auckland, people at the university, people in government, I came away with a real sense that there was a book to be written that was just crisply, maybe 100 3- to 4-page paragraphs that tried to address and summarize the core issues, the best practices of a place like Silicon Valley, so that everybody would have the advantage of an equal starting place. As I saw this community and the sophistication, the energy, the vibrancy to it, and felt that what it lacked was probably a couple of generations of experience in starting the businesses, it's not unusual. New Zealand's not unusual in that regard. And so I felt this book would be helpful to New Zealand and to every place else that's trying to build innovation centers that can rival those in the United States, a leg up. And so that's why I wrote Straight Talk for Startups, and it's been getting really nice reviews. It came out in June. People really like it. People love it in the States, and it seems to be the audience, the global audience I was aiming for, seems to also be responding nicely to it.
And rule one, I think, of the book is that it's easy to start and difficult to succeed. And I guess just thinking about that number one rule, and perhaps with the context of the angel investors here, I mean, what do you think the role of angel investors are at that, their impact on, I guess, investors at the start? One of the things in New Zealand, we have quite a vibrant angel community. Is there too much angel capital? Do angel investors sometimes make it too easy? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I remarked yesterday about the quirkiness of this market being so robust at the bottom with great entrepreneurs and angels, and such a hole in the middle for scaling and experience. And I do think the reason that it is easy to start and difficult to scale in the United States is different than it is here. The reason it's easy to start in the United States is because there is a surplus of capital. And so everybody with an idea is getting funded. The reason it's hard to succeed is because everybody with an idea is getting funded. And so there is this competition for mentors, board members, talent. There is this perverse tendency to try to pursue scale versus good business fundamentals in order to distance yourself from the pack. These things are not good for entrepreneurs, and they're not good for entrepreneurship. Here, it's easy to start because of this community. There's so many angels who will give you a chance. But it's harder to succeed here, not just because of potentially the dearth of talent, but the dearth of scale and capital. So I do think as we see capital at certain levels in the startup community, you have to be careful in evaluating whether it is balanced. And I think this is an out of balance culture from a capital standpoint. The US is out of balance for different reasons.
Great. And one of the themes in your book, and I think it was sort of touched upon in some of the earlier discussions already this morning, is there's a heavy people focus. So there's probably a expectation maybe that Silicon Valley is sort of financial outcomes and that scaling, all these things sort of take the forefront. But in your book, I guess there's a real focus on the people that you're dealing with. And just picking up on one of the themes today, and I heard the word value and purpose. Is that something that you're looking at that early stage in an investment decision? And if you are, can you share with us how you can pick up on the values that you see an entrepreneur bring when they perhaps want capital, and how you can judge sort of that sense of purpose?
For me, purpose and values are critical because I invest in talent. I'm a talent manager. From the days when I was a rock and roll promoter to now, I have always focused on talent. Talent's always created value for me. And so the skills that I've developed, the ability to spot opportunity is all around people. And so I look for a couple of key things when I'm looking at somebody pitching me. I want to understand, and I alluded to this yesterday, I want to understand why. I want to understand what drives them to do this thing, because it is a hard thing to do, and I want to understand how they're motivated. Because if they're simply motivated by the bottom line, and certainly when I see MBAs pitch to me a lot, they pitch to me these sort of analytical, well thought out, cerebral business plans, well researched, but I don't see a soul in those. And the problem is that when the plan meets the enemy, everything is lost. And you need to bushwhack your way to success. And that takes a tenacity that goes way beyond making money. It requires somebody to care a lot about the outcome and care a lot about the value that's being created. So I look for somebody who can explain to me why this particular project, why it's going to make a difference, why it motivates them, why I should care, get me to care about them and the project, and then why now? What is special about this time that makes this opportunity a ripe opportunity? So I look at those three things when I look at people, but I also look at other things as well. I want to make sure that they're people who are capable of learning on the job, that they're open, that they are open to new ideas, that they're open to coaching. I do believe that great entrepreneurs tend to be a relatively extraordinary group. You might call them lunatics. And I love that in them. I never want to take that out of them, but I need to sort of soften their edges to make sure they can work effectively with others. So I look for those sorts of values in people, and frankly, I'm not interested in investing, and this is personal, I can't say this is a Valley thing, but I'm not interested in investing just because somebody told me how to make money. There's a lot of ways to make money. But if I'm going to spend my time and energy, I need to spend it on people I think deserve it and on projects that are worthwhile.
And I've heard you describe the sort of founders that you look for as being lunatics before. How do you sort of supplement those lunatics with things like, say, diversity, and both in terms of, I mean, you've mentioned that you're looking for people with openness and open to new ideas, but how do you then sort of make sure that the lunatics have the right diversity around them to make sure that the business succeeds as well?
I consider it my job to build teams that accentuate the strengths of the leadership and founders. So I need to do an evaluation of what I think will work around them to help center them and to help drive them, to help make them their best, and to make sure that you've got the right people around the table. I consider that my job. And so I look for those attributes that the founders lack, that experience the founders lack, and figure out how to bring it in, whether I bring it at the board level or at the advisory level or at the executive team level. And then trying to work with the founders either directly or sometimes because I'm the investor, that's uncomfortable for them. So bring in a coach who will help them navigate that process and develop them. I think for me, it's always important to success, not just to have the company have a payoff, but to see the development of the founders in the process. There may be a point where the company's growing so rapidly that the founders can't keep up, and I have to advise them to take a different seat on the bus. But if I can get the bus across with them at the steering wheel, that's victory.
One of the other rules is, it sounds a bit bizarre, but be normal.
Yeah.
Can you sort of expand upon what that sort of means when you're talking to entrepreneurs, you're telling them, be normal?
Entrepreneurs are passionate people. They're excitable people. They can be very focused and monofocused on something. They may not be the easiest people to spend time with or break bread with. But they are a font of energy. They are a reactor for the success of the organization. And so my advice in the book to founders is try to hide some of that energy a little bit when you're dealing with investors, to let them understand that you are malleable in the process, but ultimately understand that what makes you a great founder is something that's quite special and will separate you from the group, and you're not normal. And I look for people who aren't normal every day to change the world.
Jack earlier on was talking, I think, the sort of view of millennials. He looks like a millennial, so I'm assuming that's right. Are you seeing, with the millennial generation, that they're open to, people with decades more experience, sort of perhaps supplementing I think you call it the naivety of the founder?
I told Jack he had a whole generation on his shoulders. This happens a lot, obviously, when you've got a millennial in the room and everybody wants to ask them what millennials are like, of course. But I definitely see some generalizations in Silicon Valley around millennials. They are definitely a different breed in terms of leadership and management and organization. They're in a hurry, and so was I at that age. But where I think we differ is I had a tremendous amount of respect for experience and tried to suck it dry all around me. Most millennials I work with every day seem to ignore experience and history on a regular basis. And I think that's to their detriment. And so I try to bring that into the discussions. It's interesting how often somebody will come in and pitch me, a young person will come in and pitch me, and they'll tell me they've got some novel, revolutionary idea or process, and I will then raise something from the distant past, like 5 years ago. And I get a blank stare. Or I will raise an analogue, something that failed in the past, and ask them to distinguish it. And the answer is, because this is amazing, and I don't even know what you're talking about with the other thing. So I think that's a difference between when I was young and ambitious and running fast to the young, ambitious people I'm seeing today. I don't know why that is exactly. But again, I think it's part of my responsibility to bring that history to bear so they can learn from that. The cheapest way to learn and develop as a founder and as a team is on the backs of others. If you don't have to invent it, if you don't have to create it, if you don't have to take the risk, if you don't have to fail to learn, and you can learn from the failures of others around you, there's nothing faster and cheaper than doing that. So trying to bring that reservoir of history to a founder and a founding team is, again, part of what I consider my job to be on that board of directors. We talked a lot about governance yesterday, and I have a chapter in the book basically saying governance is for governments. And startups are not governments, and they should be surrounded by operators. They should be surrounded by people who can grow and develop their business and help them develop. That's not to say governance is important. Clearly, there's legal obligations, and in the long term, as the company gets bigger and you take on more and more investors and there's more and more people's lives at stake every day in the company, you need to spend more time making sure that you've dotted all the I's. But in an early stage company, governance takes a back seat to development of talent, development of business, development of organization.
You mentioned failure there, and just sort of connecting that with mental health and other things that is becoming a more talked about issue, certainly in New Zealand and I suspect in other countries as well. I mean, what's your sort of experience with failure? I think one of the things that I find interesting in New Zealand is it's not that well discussed, failure, and I think you've mentioned before that failure is something that, in particularly the US culture, is people look back at the failures and almost celebrate that this is how I got there and get all the war stories out. I mean, what's your sort of message around failure, and particularly for angel investors as well, because they're the ones that, if there is a failure, are financially going to be failing as well. Do you have any ideas around that?
Well, the first thing is failing is not a virtue, so we shouldn't pretend it is a virtue. Nobody wants to fail, and it's best if you don't. That being said, in our business, we're in the business of inventing the future. If we're not failing a lot, we're not trying hard enough. Think about this as sort of, bench science work. If you're not out there making mistakes all the time, learning from them, revising, refining, then you're not innovating. And if you can't fail, either from a investor standpoint or an entrepreneur standpoint, for whatever reason, your bank, your wallet isn't deep enough, or you've got obligations, or whatever that is, then you shouldn't be in this business, because this business will run in cycles, and like any good gambler, you will go red for a while, and if you can't stay in the game and come back out of it, you are going to lose. Failure to me is when you stop trying. You don't really fail in this business as long as you're alive and you have a path forward and a belief. And when you stop trying, that's failure. Now, there is plenty of times and plenty of opportunities when stopping is the right thing to do, where failing is the right thing to do. But if you're continually learning, refining, and improving, then you're not failing, even if the information you're getting back is inconsistent with the assumptions that you put together around success. So I do think that it's important to avoid failure. But given our business, we have to embrace it, and we have to figure out how we're going to fail forward and how we're going to fail towards success in our own investing or our own creation of businesses or any single entrepreneurial venture.
And how do you think founders can build up that resilience? As you say, there's going to be a few failures before they, great if you can hit out of the park on the first one, but how do you sort of help founders, like particularly as an investor, if you have a bit more experience, how do you, get them prepared and see that they've got the tools around resilience as well?
It's really hard. I mean, I must say, it takes a toll on me. I mean, there's many times in parts of the cycle where I feel like a hospice worker. Right? Where I am just burying companies and consoling founders, right? And I've been through a lot of cycles. I mean, I've been doing this for 30-something years. And it takes a toll on me. It truly takes a toll on me personally when that happens. I feel very bad for everybody involved. That being said, I've seen even worse ramifications. I had a young founder commit suicide 10 years ago. He was 22, dropped out of Columbia. The press had made him a media star as part of a team with an early stage venture. They made him a media star way too early. It was way too early to call this a win. They moved to San Francisco from New York. I took them under my wing. I actually didn't invest at the time. I just mentored them. And one day I got a call. The company had been failing for a while, had not been able to find its way, could not live up to all of the press and celebrity that they had. And this 20-year kid was just absolutely crestfallen. He didn't know how to recover. His whole identity was in that picture in the New York Times. He had no context. And I didn't see it coming. I did not see it coming. Those costs are tragic. Those costs are tragic. And it was interesting, yesterday after, I don't know how many people saw Janine's talk yesterday, but I talked to her afterwards at length, asking her for clues as to, as a board member investor, how I could help when she went through 13, 14, whatever years of burnout, to ultimately feel like she had to leave her company and establish a new identity to save herself. I had a coach, a mentor, when I was developing in the business, a guy named Bill Campbell, well known to many people. He was Steve Jobs' mentor. He was Larry Page's and Sergey's mentor. He was Bezos's mentor. He and I were buddies. We started companies early on. I worked closely with him for 10 years, and then he and I did projects together and met every month for the next 20, just to shoot the shit. He was an amazing man, and he had been a football coach. That's kind of why they called him the coach. What I learned from him was watching him manage talent. He knew exactly when to stress the talent, and he knew exactly when to pull back the stress. He knew exactly when to breathe, give them a chance to exhale. He knew exactly when to push them beyond what they thought their limits were. Such an art form, such an art form. And that's the art form I try to emulate. Trying to be in touch, really in touch with the emotional health of the people I'm working with. A lot of people will pull back before they reach their limit. I actually do see gender differences in this. Men will tend to be more aggressive and bold on that. There's a lot of women that I've encouraged to go further than they thought they could go and watched them go the distance every time. But you also need to know when they're not going to make it across the line, and you need to pull that back, and you need to know how to stretch them, and you need to know how to rest them. So resilience is interesting. I did a talk on resilience at the Skoll Foundation a few years ago in Oxford, and so I did a little research on what is resilience. And what fascinating to me was the qualities of resilience look just like the qualities of entrepreneurship, but one. So the idea of, if you take a look at what the attributes of resilience are, they're having a vision, right? Having a vision, having a creative solution to achieving that vision. And here's where the difference is. If you look at an entrepreneur, they tend to be unrealistically optimistic. If you look at somebody who's resilient, they tend to be realistically optimistic. And so bridging that gap for an entrepreneur becomes my challenge. Because the other two attributes are very much the same. I'm going to see them in great entrepreneurs. But making sure that there's some, that I tighten the gap between the realism and the passion that an entrepreneur has to make sure that they don't go off the rails. I consider that my job. That's part of my job. Pay attention.
And I suppose that's sort of connected to self-awareness as well. So do it is, I suppose, that gap really is self-awareness. And do you sort of see founders typically are low on the self-awareness rating, and therefore they're higher on the passion and the drive? Is that sort of a generalization?
Yeah, and this is a conversation I have a lot, and some people hate it when I say this, but the best entrepreneurs I've ever met, the ones who make the biggest disruptions in the world, are flawed people. They have a chip on their shoulder. They are willing to compromise the things that regular people value very much, relationships, health, those sorts of things, in order to accomplish a vision sometimes in a totally irrational way. And a lot of people look for founders that to them appear like central casted CEOs. Rational, smart leaders, people capable of inspiring others, bringing people along. That's not what the best entrepreneurs, in my experience, actually look like. And so I need to make sure that that entrepreneur's immense energy and vision works with the rest of the organization so that I've got one entity, all the wood, one arrow, and things working together. And that's the challenge, because that's a wild horse I do not want to break. But on the other hand, I need to move it across the pasture to the finish line. And that's a talent. That's the work. That's the hard work we do. If we look for CEO-ready founders who we can have normal conversations with around all the things we know as operators every day and expect them to respond, we will not enable the best talent to challenge the status quo. So we all need to be talent managers, not just governance boards, not just people who help them perform against plan. We need to manage talent from the founders down through the organization.
Yeah, on the talent management piece, I mean, you talked about your sort of background as a manager of a rock band and your mentor's experience as a coach. For the room here, for the angel investors, how do you take that role on as a coach for a founder as well? Because I think a lot of investors will be looking, how do I help the company versus how do I help the individual? What are the sort of is it something that you already have as some sort of experience in your formative years like you had and Bill Campbell did, or is it something that you need as angel investors, if you don't have that, is it something you need to be working on to ensure the success of the people and the business?
Look, everybody has strengths and weaknesses, and I think it's always a mistake to focus on your weaknesses and always improving them. If you have strength in this area, it's great to improve them. You can always get reasonably good, but I think more importantly is build a board that has somebody who's capable of doing that on it. It doesn't have to be you. I think you have to have the sensitivity to it. You have to have an appreciation for it. But it may not be your skill set. You may be the person who knows how to drive hard on the numbers. You may be the person who knows how to drive hard on the sales. You may be the best person for dealing with governance and accountability. But somebody on that board of directors has to be able to deal well with talent. And so you need to create diverse boards of experience and backgrounds in order to be able to accomplish that. That's why diversity is important. This room is world class. And I'm not just saying that because I want to be invited again back next year. Though, if you want to, maybe. No, it's truly world class. I mean, I have a tremendous admiration and fondness for you people, this society, and what you're building, this country. I mean, I didn't come back here because, look, I'm not coming back here to make a bunch of money. I'm coming back here because I'm trying to keep you guys from screwing up. I'm trying to give you the benefit of experience so you can do it the Kiwi way. Not my way, the Kiwi way. And don't think because I come here with an American accent, I've got the answers. I do not. I have the questions. And these are the questions you need to wrestle with if you guys are going to build a Kiwi infrastructure around innovation that's going to be successful in the long term in your own way. Sue's had me and Marcel and a couple of other people for dinner the other day in Wellington, and somebody commented around the table that one of the things they thought that distinguished New Zealand was the humanity, the empathy that runs through the business community, in particular the relationship between founders and investors. I've never heard any ecosystem say that to me before. And it rang true. Again, I don't know how to characterize it, but there's something particularly human rather than financial in the way that you guys all interact and care about each other and what you're creating. You can't lose that. It's too precious. It's, you know, there's often an insecurity or lack of confidence, of course, being in a couple of small islands way far away from where the action is and feeling subscale. And you've been sort of asked to take the All Blacks to the United States and put helmets on them and have them play the New England Patriots, and they're going to lose. You got to redefine the game. Have the Patriots come back here, take their helmets off, and see if they can beat the All Blacks. Right? You got to redefine the game around what you do best. What's happening in the world right now? Refugees are being turned away from the border. Immigrants are being bastardized in my country and throughout Europe. Governments are changing and as a result of the pressures of dealing with different cultures, different people trying to find a way to make a living to support their families, who are willing to risk everything. What have you guys built here? What you guys have done with your heritage in figuring out how to bring the best of the Maori culture and the Eastern culture and the Western culture together, you're not behind, you're ahead. People should be looking to you as an example of how to solve their problems. And that cultural appreciation, that cultural sensitivity reflects itself even in this room and even in the entrepreneurial ecosystem you guys are building. That's what's uniquely Kiwi. How you're going to resist the idea of trying to put on helmets and go and build scale, you know, and raise big money and create unicorns as a matter of course, I don't know, but you got to resist that. You've got to figure out how to do this in a robust way that solves your problems, that keeps your best talent and young people here creating the future in a way that is culturally consistent with what makes this place special.